In May 2020, we bought a new farm in central Illinois, sight unseen, while stuck in China during the COVID pandemic. In June, we planted soybeans into the field, blindly without any farming history. In October, we harvested the soybeans, remotely from China, and yielded a modest 60 bushels per acre. In November, we had the field soil sample. Now it's January, so let's review the soil fertility results. We had the field soil sampled using 2.5 acre GPS grids, and now we finally have the results back. Let's get a bit nerdy and deep dive the results to see what we bought and how much work we have ahead of us. Just as a warning, I'm not a real agronomist, and I still consider myself a rookie farmer. If you disagree with my analysis, please comment down below and let me know if you have suggestions. Here's how I like to read the results of a soil test report. I typically take the soil reports from the lab and then regroup the results from left to right to make it a bit more logical to process. The measured nutrients are in the columns from left to right, and the soil sample results are listed in the rows, usually with a field summary at the bottom. If done properly, the sample number should be mapped to a specific location in the field. For this field I'm reviewing, I have 27 GPS coordinates linked to 27 soil samples. Now that we've covered the layout of the soil report, let's review the major nutrient categories measured in most reports. The first section includes the fundamentals, where it shows the cation exchange capacity, CEC, and the organic matter. Then it shows the soil pH, followed by the primary nutrients with their associated base saturation percentages. Then we see the secondary nutrients, and finally the last section of the report shows the micronutrients, which should include at least 5 and sometimes more. So let's get into the detailed analysis, starting with the fundamental section first. I start with the cation exchange capacity, or CEC for short. In this field it ranges from 11 to 18 with an average of 15. This puts the CEC in a solid medium textured soil, so it has a nice combination of holding capacity and drainage capability. For the most part, this is not going to change much over time, so I use this as a baseline. I then look at organic matter. For this field it ranges from the low 3s to the low 4s. This is about normal for our area and provides a fair amount of nitrogen and sulfur release during the growing season. These two items are important to understand when looking at the other nutrients. Soil pH gives us a good indication of the fertility balance. For corn and soybeans, we like to keep the pH between 6.3 and 7.3, but it's even better if we can keep it in the mid to high 6s. The average for this field is perfect at a 6.8, but using the average would be a mistake as there's a lot of variability in this field. It has a range on the low side of 6.0 to a 7.6 on the high side. This poses a bit of a challenge because there are 4 sections of this field below 6.3 shown in red, and there are 4 sections above 7.3 shown in yellow with a lot of variability in between. It's much easier to raise the pH, but more challenging to lower these high 7s down. Most likely this will require some lime for the lower pHs and some sulfur for the higher pHs, but it would be a mistake to only look at the pH. We need to look at the rest of the report before making any fertilizer decisions. It's likely that some of these pH levels are tying up some of the other nutrients. In this section, we have the primary nutrients including phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, along with the associated base saturation percentages on the right-hand side. We can get started by looking at phosphorus separately from the rest of the elements in this section. However, later we'll need to revisit phosphorus again as there are some ratios to watch out for with the micronutrients. On average, the phosphorus looks slightly low at 71 pounds, but there's a significant variability ranging from 26 to 235 pounds. I would like to see all of these numbers be at least 100 pounds, and I plan on bringing them up to around 200 pounds over the next couple of years. Moving on to the rest of the primary nutrients requires us to look at both the absolute pounds in the field, but also the base saturation percentages. There are 5 items within the base saturation section that need to be looked at all together. The total of potassium, magnesium, calcium, hydrogen, and sodium must equal 100%. For some reason, my lab does not provide the results for hydrogen or sodium, so I calculated these two numbers together just as a placeholder for this report. Potassium should be between 4 and 8%. Magnesium should be between 12 to 20% depending on the CEC of the soil. Calcium should be between 65 and 80%. Hydrogen should be between 4 to 10%, and sodium should be less than 0.5%. As you can see, almost all potassium samples are below 4% and need to be raised. This also matches the absolute pounds in the primary nutrient section. I need to bring the pounds of potassium up to a minimum of 400 pounds on their way up to 800 total pounds. A quick calculation shows that I will need to variably add between 200 and 500 pounds of potash per acre to bring all of the K base percentages just to 4%, and that 4% is the minimum. All of the magnesium levels are within range except for one sample 18 where I have a low pH and either high hydrogen or sodium. This most likely can be resolved with lime applications. Since the pH is low and the magnesium is also low, I should apply a dolomatic lime just for this specific grid, and that way to bring up the magnesium and the pH. Calcium, on the other hand, has some higher levels on half of the field. 13 of the samples are above 80%, which is too high. However, most of these samples have the correct level of magnesium with lower potassium. This will likely need to be resolved using some elemental sulfur to drop the pH below 7, which will add hydrogen and should reduce the calcium while simultaneously adding potassium to bring its percentage up. So this is a little bit tricky, but it's all about the balance. There's also one grid in the field where the calcium percentage is too low. Since the associated pH is 6.0, this grid can be easily fixed by applying calcitic lime. Most of the samples are showing little to no hydrogen. However, this happens when pH is 7.0 or above, so this is no surprise. So in summary, for base saturation, I need to add potassium and elemental sulfur to reduce the pH and fertility tie-ups, plus a little bit of lime in some of the lower pH areas. Sulfur is the only secondary nutrient listed in the soil test report. We need to pay close attention to the soil test reports as sometimes nutrients are listed in parts per million, ppm, and other times listed in pounds. In this case, this specific report switches from pounds to ppm starting at the secondary nutrients section. As a reference, 1 ppm equals 2 pounds, so you can simply multiply the 1 ppm times 2 to get your pounds. For my specific report, the sulfur ranges from a low of 3.1 to 9.0 ppm. All of these are significantly low. I need to raise this to a minimum of 25 ppm, but would like to see it get closer to 50. Sulfur is leachable, so I need to be a little bit careful with the application, but I should be okay considering the CEC numbers of this field. The next section includes the 5 micros: boron, zinc, manganese, iron, and copper. And then there's an added section to the right that I created for ratios. Starting with boron, this field is low in all 27 samples. The results range from 0.4 to 0.6 parts per million, but they need to be between 1.2 and 3.0 ppm. Boron is leachable like nitrogen and sulfur, so I need to be a bit careful with my plans to build these levels back up. However, with these extremely low readings, I would expect to see some level of tip back on the ears of corn. The zinc numbers are too low on 21 of the 27 samples when looking at the parts per million alone, but this is one of the nutrients that we also need to look at the ratio of phosphorus to zinc. Zinc should be at a ratio of 10 parts phosphorus to 1 part zinc. For my goal of 100 pounds of phosphorus minimum, I will need at least 5 parts per million of zinc for every portion of this field. And as I continue to increase the phosphorus to 200 pounds, I will need to keep the zinc in ratio by increasing it to 10 ppm. Manganese and iron are all within range or above the desired targets. We'll not go into the details today. However, copper ppm numbers are within range or above the targets when only looking at the absolute ppms. Copper is a lot like zinc, where it must be kept in ratio with phosphorus at a rate of 30 parts phosphorus to 1 part copper. When looking at these ratios, 5 of this field samples need higher copper due to higher phosphorus levels. So copper and zinc need to be balanced in conjunction with the phosphorus plants. So to sum it up, the fertility needs a lot of work in order for me to grow 300 bushel corn and 100 bushel soybeans. This is the full report view of the areas that need attention based on my target thresholds. You can see there are 7 major categories that need attention. Here's what I plan to do. I will need to use variable rate application in order to get the nutrients balanced across the field. I need to fix the pH using lime for the lower pH areas and elemental sulfur for the high pH areas. I need to add a heavy amount of phosphorus and potassium. I need to add sulfur. Now some of this can come from the elemental sulfur for the high pH areas, but I'll still need more in general. And finally, for the micros, I need to add boron, zinc, and copper. I prepared this table as a reference to show you what my personal fertility targets are. Do you agree with these targets, or do you work to a different set of targets? Let me know in the comments section down below. I welcome the YouTube farmers, agronomists, and internet sleuths to comment down below and tell me if I'm crazy, if I'm on the right track, or what you would do differently. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to follow our farming channel and other occasional Chinese activities.